No, because I see text me and so you do. I'll show up and that's it.
Yeah.
Part of it is that
Hi, good to see you.
morning.
Hi, good morning. How's it going?
Said we're recording, so we're live.
We're ready recording? Okay.
Whenever you're ready.
It's live, no edit.
Okay, no editing. I'll try not to say anything crazy.
By the way, we can edit. If anything comes up, no problem. We can edit.
Okay. Try to be uncontroversial. Well, if I'm controversial, it'll go viral. That'll be
It'll be all
famous. Okay.
We used to.
On behalf of Rebbe who couldn't make it this morning.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. It's always a pleasure and honor to be here in Eish Kodesh. Whenever you have the opportunity to share Torah in this Makom Kadosh, it's always a very special zechus, and I want to thank all of you for coming to learn together this morning. I also want to apologize. Whenever I'm invited to speak somewhere, I'm always asked like a month in advance or more for a topic, and I never know what's going to be on my mind. And what I'm going to be interested in talking about, usually till much closer than a month in advance. So I always say just throw something generic on the flyer. So, you're Yotze, right? That's pretty generic. Is it halacha? Is it hashkafa? What exactly are we talking about? So here's the topic that was on my mind. It's something that Mori V'Rabbi Rav Shachter likes to talk about a lot. It's not hashkafa. I figured, you don't need hashkafa from me, especially in this particular shul. But you don't need anything from me. But here's the topic that was on my mind. There is an Ikarei Emunah, one of the Ikarei Emunah that all believing Jews have to believe, if you don't want to be an Apikoros, is Shezos Torah Lo Teh Muchlefes, that the Torah does not change. The Torah as we have it is exactly the Torah that Rosh Baruch Hu gave to Moshe Rabbeinu, the Taryag Mitzvos or the Taryag Mitzvos. The laws of the Torah are not subject to change. This is one of those cases where Rav Chaim Volozhiner and the Baal HaTanya say exactly the same thing. They both explain what the basis for Zos Torah Lo Teh Muchlefes, why that's such an important belief in Yiddishkeit, because the Torah is not just a set of laws. A set of laws can change. When you have a set of laws, so you have to see if those laws make sense for this generation, for this society. But the Torah is not just a set of laws. The Torah is a description of Elokus. The Torah is a description of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not change. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not change at all. So since Ani Hashem Lo Shinisi, HaKadosh Baruch Hu cannot change, so his reflection, the Torah which reflects him, also cannot change. So everything in the Bria does change, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu is above the Bria. HaKadosh Baruch Hu precedes the Bria. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Borei, the Bria, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu cannot change, and therefore the Torah does not change. Now, given that, I would like to talk about where the Torah changes, meaning not the Torah changes. Chas v'shalom, I'm not an apikoros. I didn't come here, to give you that viral moment of Rabbi exposes himself as an apikoros. But where we find that over time, the halacha is practiced differently from one generation to the next. And if one is not sophisticated in their way of looking at things, they would get the impression that the Torah has in fact changed. When in reality, the most authentic way sometimes to follow Masorah is not to do exactly what your father did and exactly what your grandfather did, because they lived in a world of circumstances where the circumstances dictated A, and you live in a world where the circumstances will dictate B, and all of that is the same Masorah. But if you were to do A in your generation, the way your father did A in his generation, that would be a violation of the Masorah. Rav Shechter likes to talk about this in the context of Yitzchak Avinu. The Yitzchak dug the same be'eros hamayim that they had dug during Avram Avinu's lifetime, and vayikra lehen shemos k'shemos asher kara lehen aviv. And Rav Soloveitchik explained that Yitzchak followed the Masorah of his father. He tried to do exactly what Avram Avinu did, and that's why earlier in Parshas Toldos, when there was a famine, what does Yitzchak do? He goes to Gerar and he plans on the next step being to go to Mitzrayim. That's his game plan. Why does he want to go to Mitzrayim? Because that's what Avram did. Avram went to Mitzrayim when there was a famine. And Rashi quotes a medrash that says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Yitzchak, you are not permitted to go to Mitzrayim. Why not? It's what my father did. Yeah, but you're an Ola Tamima. You have a different circumstance than your father had. The halacha is that when you have a korban ola, an ola is nifsal biyotze. If it goes out of its tchum, whatever that tchum may be, and apparently the tchum for Yitzchak Avinu as an ola tamima was Eretz Yisrael, so it becomes puzzle. Avram Avinu was not an ola tamima; he was not brought up on the Akedah. So if he was not brought on the Akedah, he didn't have that din of an ola tamima that's nifsal biyotze. So by you doing the same exact thing that your father did, it would be a violation of the Masorah of your father, because the circumstances have changed. Rav Shechter points out that people often believe that by acting in the same way as their ancestors, they're following the Masorah, but the same act is often a violation of the Masorah. So it's important that a person has a Masorah. It's important that a person understands what that Masorah is. I once asked Rav Shechter when it's a good idea, how a person knows if it's a good idea to accept upon themselves a particular chumrah. Right? After October 7th, I was trying to think of appropriate chumras to accept in my own behavior, in my own life, because if a Jew goes about his day-to-day living after living through something of that magnitude for Klal Yisrael, then you're not doing it right, meaning you're not doing Judaism right. If you just go about your day-to-day activities in exactly the same way without any change in ruchnius whatsoever. So I asked him, like, what's a good chumrah and what's not a good chumrah? He said, if you have a Masorah from a Talmud Chacham for that chumrah, then it's a good chumrah. If you don't have a Masorah for a Talmud Chacham for that chumrah, then it's not a good chumrah. Meaning that we are very much a Masorah based religion. Rav Shechter often gives the example of taking medicine. Or what medication to take, how to treat various ailments. So if a person were to use all of the same medications that the Tanaim and Amoraim used, that would be the greatest violation of our Masorah. Because our Tanaim and Amoraim were not a bunch of cavemen that were living, in the past. They were using the best medical data of their time. They weren't doctors, but they had doctors, and they were listening to whatever the doctor said, the best medical data of the best medical knowledge of their time. So the way to follow our Masorah is not to take the same medicines. It's not like, oh, someone needs a brain surgery, so I'm going to go open a Maseches Ksubas and I'll learn that Amud about brain surgery. Wait, how many leeches do I need again in order to? We don't do that. That would be a violation of our Masorah, even though we'd be doing exactly the same thing that the Gemara describes. This was actually one of the fears during whenever you issue a psak halacha that's based on a shas hadchak. You're always nervous that it's going to set a precedent. People aren't going to realize that it was a shas hadchak. I remember in all the discussions we had about the tshuvas Rav Shechter wrote during COVID. So one element of every discussion, the way it worked is we brought a number of the younger Rabbanim brought the Shilas to Rav Shechter. We said, this is what the community needs to hear about. This is what they need to know. So, so can you write a tshuva? And if you would write a tshuva, then we'd get on the phone and we would discuss the potential ramifications and fallout and how people are going to interpret it. And if we can fix a word here and fix a word there. And one of the discussions on every single tshuva was, are people going to do this after COVID is over also? Meaning, are they going to not realize that this was a shas hadchak? Are they, not going to come back to shul? Are they going to not tovel the kalim? Are they going to not, all the things that we do in Judaism? Like, the whole Judaism would be different if they don't realize that it's a shas hadchak, because people often don't have the sophistication to recognize what is following Masorah and what's not. So this morning's shir That's a long introduction. This morning's shir, I would like to give as many examples as I possibly can in the time allotted. What is the time allotted? So I'd like to give a number of. I still have to give shir in yeshiva today, so don't worry. Don't worry too much. But in the time allotted, I'd like to give a lot of examples of how some of these cases are clear that by doing the same thing our fathers and grandfathers did, we'd be violating the Masorah. Some of them are debatable, but at least to bring up, so we'll be bouncing around to a lot of different areas of halacha. Many of them are issues that Rav Shechter loves to talk about. Some of them are issues that I've never heard him talk about. So let's start with one that I never really heard him talk about, and that because it's Inyanei Diyoma. Last night I had my smichas chavers here in shul, and someone every year I get the text if it happens to be on Nitzelnacht. Are you sure you're going to have the smichas chavers? Is the shir going to be chess, or are we playing chess, or are we actually having the shir? And we actually have the shir. Now, why would we do that? Why would we? So it may depend on what the reason for Nitzelnacht is. Why is it that they didn't learn Torah on the night of December 25th? So the Tamei Avin Hagim quotes a sefer Likutei Apardes, who says that in the earlier generations, any Jews who were found in the streets on the night of December 25th, to December 24th, whatever, going into December 25th, would be beaten to a pulp, and any Jewish home with a candle inside of it would begin a pogrom. So Jews couldn't leave their homes, and they couldn't light any candle in their home, so they had no way to learn Torah, so they went to sleep, because there was nothing you could do. So that was one mahalich. Karban Nesanel, in a manuscript cited in the Nitei Gavriel, explains that no, the minhag is not to learn on Nitzelnacht is a form of avelus, that the birth of Yashka is celebrated by the Christians on this day, and for us it's an avelus, because the damage that this person brought to the Jewish people over the centuries is really unspeakable. It's unbelievable. Sometimes kids are like, they think it's, what's the harm in going to enjoy the Christmas lights and singing the songs and whatever. Can you imagine if, like, in a generation or two from now, people were singing Nazi marches and were celebrating, whimsically things from the Nazis? I mean, that's what they were. In many times in history, it was just cause for pogroms and killing Jews and everything. So we mourn on that night. Thank God we live in a generation where our biggest problems aren't from the Christians anymore. But it wasn't always like that. It wasn't. Popes are still no friends of the Jews, but it wasn't always like that. So we have a night of Avelus, and one of the dinim of Avelus is that a Beis Medrash is batel, that there's an issue of Talmud Torah for an Avel. Chassam Sofer quotes this reason in the name of his Rebbe, the Rav Nassan Adler. Chassam Sofer's Rebbe, Rav Nassan Adler, said the same thing, that it's like a day, it's like the Yom Churban Abayis, and just like on Tisha B'Av we don't learn Torah, so we learn Torah on Nitzelnacht. So the Ma'inaf Kamina between the two reasons is not learning on Nitzelnacht still a thing. If there's a minhag of practicing Avelus because of the terrible destruction that this night brought, so then it would still be a thing. But if it's because you're afraid of turning on a candle, in your house because it's going to start a program, well, when it's not going to start a program to turn on to light a candle in your house, then you don't have to worry about it. Chassam Sofer in Kovitz Shuvas Simon Lamed Aleph actually rejects the explanation of his Rebbe Rav Nassan Adler. He says, if it were really a day of mourning, then the minhag shouldn't differentiate between the first and second halves of the night. But the minhag is not to learn Torah in the first half of the night and then to learn the entire second half of the night. A lot of people are Makayim the first part of the minhag, not necessarily Makayim the second part of the minhag. And if the refrain from Torah study were really a sign of Avelus, you should be able to learn Hilchas Avelus. You should be able to learn Hilchas Tisha B'Av. You should be able to learn Dvarim Shebarayim in Yirmiyahu. You should be able to do whatever you're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. So Chassam Sofer says, no, what happened was that the Christians would get up at midnight to go to attend midnight mass, and the rabbis had the following dilemma. If all the Jews were sleeping at the time that the non-Jews were running with fervor to their religious services, it would look bad for the Jews. On the other hand, the rabbis didn't want to institute a rule that people should wake up at midnight to start learning Torah, because it would appear as if it's Chukas Hagayim. They're waking up at midnight to do their thing, or we're going to wake up at midnight to do our thing. So the solution was to make a decree against Torah study in the first half of the night, and the desired result was that those people who normally learn night Seder from 8 to 12 at night Now we'll learn from 12 to 4. But it's not going to be a Takanas Chazal, because that would be Chukas Hagoyim. So it will just happen Memela, because you're not going to miss Night Seder. So if normally you have Night Seder from 8 to 12, now because you can't, you'll maybe go to sleep 8 to 12, and you'll learn from 12 to 4. That's what the Chassam Sofer says. So there are other suggestions as well as to where the minhag comes from. But it could be, right, depending on where you hold the minhag comes from, that it is Nogaya or it's not Nogaya. Bisman Hazeh. So that's one that Rav Shachta does not, an example Rav Shachta does not often give. An example that comes up, any Daf Yomi people here? Any chance? Few Daf Yomi people? Yeah. So an example comes up in this morning's Daf that just occurred to me as I was saying the Daf Shir about a half hour ago, was that the Gemara tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu tells Yoshua that you need to have some help. You're going to be the leader of the Jewish people. A leader of the Jewish people doesn't do it alone. You're going to need a lot of other people to help out. Sanhedrin Daf Ches. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Yoshua, no, dabar echad l'dar vein shnei dabarin l'dar, hachal kadkadam, you take charge, you're the leader, you're the one, nobody else helps you. So says the Maharsha, what was Moshe Rabbeinu thinking, and what did Yoshua, and why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu disagree? So the Maharsha explains, Moshe Rabbeinu was thinking, because I know that I had trouble with these people. I had trouble handling Klal Yisrael by myself, and I was told, Asfuli Shivim Mishmi Ziknei Yisrael, that you got to gather 70 people, you got to put together a Sanhedrin. You can't do it by yourself. So I figured that if Yoshua is going to follow the Masorah, he ought to do exactly what I do. So he should also gather Shivim Ish to help him out. But, says the Maharsha, what Moshe Rabbeinu didn't realize was that the people in the times of Yoshua were B'nai Torah. They were not as difficult. Sometimes, even though the Dor Midbar was a Dor Deya, but as often happens with people who are a Dor Deya, they're complicated. Right? Sometimes people that have a lot of Deya have a lot of Deos also. and they could be very, very complicated people. So Moshe Rabbeinu had to deal with a very complicated generation. So for him, he couldn't handle it on his own. But the situation changed. In the days of Yoshua, the people were B'nai Torah. They were, you tell them what to do, and they listen like a tatala. They follow along. They do exactly what you tell them to do. It's like Rabbi Reisman once commented that if you ever have like 15, 20 minutes of spare time, it's a good idea to open up Sefer Chagai and just learn Sefer Chagai. The whole Sefer is 2 prakim, 37 psukim, I think it is. The entire Sefer. 15 minutes, you can cover a whole Sefer in Navi, and it's not even a hard Sefer. There are like 3 Nevuos in the entire Sefer. It's like, so why is it so short? Because Chagai had this unusual thing that no other Nevi'im really had. Very few rabbis have ever had. Chagai told people what to do, and they listened. End the story. That was it. That was the whole book, right? Yirmiyahu didn't have such an easy job. Yeshayahu didn't have such an easy job. So they have very long books. But Chagai did exactly. He said exactly what needed to be said, and that's it. And everyone just listened. So Yoshua had an easier generation to deal with than Moshe Rabbeinu did. So the circumstance had changed. If Yoshua were to do exactly the same thing Moshe Rabbeinu did, that would be incorrect. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Paskin happened again with Yoshua. Yoshua, after the war with Yericho, Yoshua declares a cherem on anyone who takes any of the spoils of Yericho. And no one's allowed to take any of the spoils of Yericho. And then Achan goes and he takes some of the spoils of Yericho. He violates Yoshua's command. And because of that, what should have been a cakewalk, what should have been the easiest battle, the following battle of Ai was a 2-0 city. Yericho was this massive fortified city. It was hard to take. Ai should have been nothing. They should have just walked right in and taken it, like Tzal took Syria. They should have been able to take it in no time. It should have been no problem. But that's not what happened. They lost the battle of Ai because Achan went and took the spoils of Yericho. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Yoshua, it's your fault. It's your fault. Ata garamta. What do you mean it's your fault? Why did you declare a cherem? Who said you should declare a cherem on all the spoils of Yericho? Yeshua's response is, what do you mean? Who says I should declare a cherem? That was my Masorah for Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu had declared a cherem in his battles. The Maharsha explains again very similarly. The Maharsha says Yeshua thought he was following the tradition. What he didn't realize was that the circumstances had changed. That in the days of Moshe Rabbeinu, there was no such thing as Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazah. So one person does an Avera, it's his problem. It's nobody else's problem. But after Hargrizim and Harevel, when we accepted his sense of Arvus, so now we're all responsible for it. You're going to declare a Chayrim, and one person is going to have a taiva to take something, and the whole Jewish people are going to have to pay for that. So that's irresponsible to declare a chayrim. Atagaramta, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you think you're following the tradition, you're not following the tradition. To use another example Rav Shechter likes to quote, which maybe I shouldn't quote in this shul, you'll see why in a second. Rav Shechter quotes from Rav Schwab. Now Rav Schwab once noticed that a person had come to shul and he realized he left his gartel at home. And he needed a gartel. He hasn't davened out a gartel, and he realized it was. I guess it was Shabbos. He was wearing a tie. He's confused, right? So he was wearing a tie. So he quickly takes off his tie and he ties it around his waist to use it as a gartel. So Rav Schwab said that's a misunderstanding of the whole halacha. Why do you wear a gartel? Because he called nikros halakach Yisrael, that you should go respectfully to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To be mafsik between the leiv and the erva, our modern day clothing covers that already, right? Meaning if you wear a belt, that's already good enough. So why do you put an extra gartel? He called nikros halakach Yisrael, that you should go and approach HaKadosh Baruch Hu with a sense of cover, that you're preparing properly to approach Hashem. In the times of Rav Schwab, although less and less nowadays, if you wanted to dress formally, you wore a tie. Now already you see at weddings, half the people. I was at a wedding, the chassan didn't wear a tie recently. You see, it's falling out of style a lot. But in Rav Schwab's side, Rav Schwab is a yaki, it's proper, and so he thought that was, you think you're following the Masorah, but you're going against the Masorah, because the Masorah is to show covet for tefillah. Now I'll give you another controversial one, but not controversial in the same sense. Controversial in the sense that it's a huge chiddush lahalacha that you probably never heard of before, and it seems like it's against the Shulchan Aruch. What's the halacha? Rosh Chodesh, you forget Yalav Yavo at night, at Mariv. Do you repeat Shemona Esrei? You don't repeat Shemona Esrei. So you don't repeat Shemona Esrei. What if you forget Yalav Yavo at Shachris on Rosh Chodesh? So then you do repeat Shemona Esrei, right? That's, those are the basics. We know this, right? Rav Shechter often points out, you need to be very, very careful not to forget Yalav Yavo at night. Meaning, normally we take that and we say, so daytime is really important. You need to be more careful today. Rav Shechter said, no. During the daytime, you have an opportunity to make up for it. At nighttime, if you miss it, you miss it, and there's no way to make up for it. So you just lost it. You just lost the entire opportunity. Where's he coming from with that? So he says the following chiddush la'alach. It's not Rav Shechter's chiddush. It's a chiddush that he quoted from Rav Soloveitchik in the name of his grandfather, the name of Reb Chaim. The halacha is, again, you forget Yalav Yavo Shachris, you repeat Shemona Esrei. So what's the vart? Why is it that you repeat Shemona Esrei? Is it because you weren't Yotzei Shemona Esrei when you forget Yalav Yavo? So Reb Chaim said, no, you're Yotzei Shemona Esrei if you forget Yalav Yavo. But there's a separate din called Baruch Hashem Yom Yom, Haskaras Me'ena Ma'ora. That each day, when there's a special day, you're supposed to mention that day in your tefillah. And if you don't mention that day in your tefillah, you lost out. Not on the tefillah is still kosher, the tefillah still counts, you lost out on that din of Haskaras Me'en HaMa'ora. So Reb Chaim understood that the idea that you repeat Shemona Esrei when you forget Yalav Yavo at Shachris is a heter. It's a heter to repeat all 19 brachos, so that you could fulfill Haskaras Me'en HaMa'ora. Well, how do we have such a heter? It's 19 brachos levatala. I was already Yotzei all those brachos. I was Yotzei Shemona Esrei. Well, there's such a concept called the Tfilas Nedava. So you're allowed to take on this extra tefillah. You're allowed to take on this extra tefillah in order to fulfill Haskaras Me'en HaMa'ora. What's his raya? His raya is what happens. I actually just got the shayla last week. A shliach tzibur forgets Yalav Yavo in his Shemona Esrei. In his private Shemona, or even in the Chazar Shas for that matter. So Chazar Shas is a little more complicated. So the halacha is that he does not repeat Shemona Esrei. It's a tircha d'tzibur. He does not repeat Shemona Esrei. So what do you mean? If he wasn't Yotzei Shemona Esrei, how does he not repeat Shemona Esrei? Because it's tircha d'tzibur.
Is that in the private or in the repeat or in both?
Either one. So he relies on Musaf, because in Musaf he's going to be Masker Me'en HaMa'ora. Meaning, since he's going to be saying Musaf anyway, so he'll be Yotzei this din of Haskaras Me'en HaMa'ora. So we wouldn't factor in Tircha Tzibura if you were actually not Yotzei with his Shemona Esrei. So Reb Chaim therefore said, since nowadays we don't do Tfilas Nedava, nowadays Tfilas Nedava is not something we're willing to take upon ourselves, because we're worried that we're not going to have proper kavana, right? That's why even though the halacha is halacha mufareshes and there's no cholek, there's no one that argues that if you don't have kavana in the first bracha Shemona Esrei, you're not yotze Shemona Esrei, right? But yet we don't repeat Shemona Esrei even if you didn't have kavana in the first bracha. I mean, most people, I think, do not repeat Shemona Esrei even if they didn't have kavana in the first bracha. Why not? It's halacha mufareshes. There's no one that argues. There's no one that argues on that. So why don't we do it? Because we don't have confidence, and we're going to have kavanah the next time. We'll try again, and we'll be on a constant loop of just having shmona because we're never. So we don't do tefillas nedava, and therefore, says Reb Chaim, even a yachid should rely on musaf. That if he forgets Yalav Yavo and Shachris, he should rely on musaf, which is fascinating. That means the way Reb Chaim learns it is that if you're following exactly what the Alter Zayda did by repeating Shemona Esrei because you forgot Yalav Yavo, you're relying on Tfilas and Dava, but you didn't realize circumstances changed. The Alter Zayda knew how to have Kavanah in Shemona Esrei, and therefore he was allowed to do it Tfilas and Dava. We're not allowed. We don't know how to have Kavanah in Shemona Esrei, therefore we're not allowed to do it Tfilas and Dava. Shachta Paskins is halacha l'maisa. Again, most poskim just do what it says in Shulchan Aruch, but Shachta uses this as an example. Let's make it a Chanukah connection a little bit. The Shliach Tzibur again skips Yalav Yavo Shachris. The Mechaber in Sim Kuf Chavav Sif Gimel quotes the Gemara that if you forget Yalav Yavo Shachris, you don't repeat Shemona Esrei. The Shliach Tzibur doesn't repeat Shemona Esrei because it's Tircha D'Tzibura and he relies on the Musaf. No. We'll get to Al Nisim in a second. So Yalav Yavo, not on Yalav Yavo on Rosh Chodesh, whatever. The Ramah quotes that some say the same is true on Shabbos and Yantiv. That if you daven a weekday Shemona Esrei on Shabbos morning, don't worry, you'll mention Shabbos when you daven Musaf. So you don't have to worry about it. You're Yotzei Tefillah, and you'll mention Shabbos when you get to Musaf. So the Mishbur over there quotes from the Levush that some disagree with the Ramah and say, what do you mean? You can't rely on Musaf for Shabbos and Yom Tov. So Rav Shachter quotes from Rav Lichtenstein that according to Rav Soloveitchik and Rav Chaim, that forgetting Yalav Yavo doesn't ruin your Shemona Esrei. It just holds you back from the kiyum of Haskaras Meina Ma'ora. Whereas let's say Hamelech HaKadosh is part of the nusach of Shemona Esrei. So there's no doubt that if you said a weekday Shemona Esrei on Shabbos and Yom Tov, you're not Yotzei Tefillah at all. Right, so then you shouldn't be able to rely on Musaf l'chora because it's not tefillah at all, unless you say that no, even on Shabbos and Yom Tov, you're really allowed to say a weekday Shemona Esrei. It's just Tircha D'Tzibura. We don't want to be matriach people to say the full length Shemona Esrei of a weekday. Now the Gemara in Shabbos Tav Chav Daled asks about saying Ala Nisim in Birchas Hamazon. Do we say Ala Nisim in Birchas Hamazon on Chanukah? You can go to a Chanukah party tonight, or tomorrow night, or Motzei Shabbos, or Sunday, or probably all four, and there's going to be Birchas Hamazon because you ate enough sufganiyot to demand washing on them. So do you say Ala Nisim in Birchas Hamazon? So the Gemara says, well, on the one hand, it's D'Rabbanan, so maybe it's not necessary, or maybe because it's Persumi Nisa, it's so chashuv that we should say Ala Nisim even in Birchas Hamazon. So Rava holds that it's not necessary, but if you say it, you should say it in Hoda'ah, right? You should say it in Noda'ah. The Rav explained, of Salvation explained that Baruch Hashem Yom Yom doesn't apply on Chanukah and Purim, because Chanukah and Purim are only midrabanan. Baruch Hashem Yom Yom means a day that has inherent kedusha, not superimposed kedusha. Anything that Kosh Baruch Hu created is inherent, right? Anything that the Rabbanan impose is going to be superimposed kedusha. It's not inherent kedusha. So it's a separate takan of Persumi Nisa that Asam Yom Tov and Bahal Vada. So the question of the Gemara is whether that takana was only for tefillah or also for benching. Had it been a din of Baruch Hashem Yom Yom, then it would apply obviously to both davening and to benching, because we have Haskaras Meina Mora in both davening and benching. And that's why on days that we don't have a carbon musaf, we don't repeat Shemona Esrei when we forget Haskaras Meina Mora, because on days that don't have a carbon musaf, like Chanukah, remember that was a thing in DRS when kids, when I was a Rebbe there, when kids would start getting impatient after a long challah, we're like, just hang on, you still got Musaf. And they're like, oh, Musaf, I forgot about that. There's no Musaf on Chanukah, obviously. So the kids will believe anything. So So there's why is there no Musaf on Chanukah? Because it's not a Daraisa, right? A day that's not a Daraisa Yom Tov doesn't have Musaf. So the Haskaras Me'ena Ma'ora is not a kiyum of Baruch Hashem Yom Yom. When you say Al Anisim in Shemona Esrei, that's not a kiyum of Baruch Hashem Yom Yom, because Baruch Hashem Yom Yom is only on a Yom Tov Midaraisa. So Haskaras Me'ena Ma'ora of Al Anisim is not Haskaras Me'ena Ma'ora. It's Al Anisim is just a Pirsum Nisa. It's a chiyuv to be Marich Ba'odah, which is really Lahal Lahodos. That's what this Yom Tov is all about. It's to be Marich Ba'odah. And that's why many say Ve Al Anisim with a Vav, to show that it's a Hemshich of the bracha of Hodah, right? Sometimes you have these little things in your siddur and you're not sure what that's all about, right? There's a vav in parentheses, right? So what's the why vav? Because it's showing that it's a hemshich of Hodah. That's why there's no alanisim in alamichya, right? Because the whole nukuda of alanisim is all from Rav Shachtar and Sefer Eretz Tzvi. The whole nukuda of alanisim is that it's being marich in Hodah. The whole concept of alamichya is to be mekatza. Right, it's to take Birchas Hamazon and be mekatzer. So it's not shaykh to be marich in that which is being mekatzer. Right? That's the whole notion of alamichya, is that it's a bracha ksara. So it's not shaykh to have a takana to be marich. Let me give you another example. Okay, let's so we already covered nittel, we already covered Chanukah. So now let's talk about hilchos kashrus. There is a halacha in Yeridea. There's something called the davar sheyesh lo matirin. So if you have something that's usher now, but if you just hang on a little bit, it will become mutter. Something that's muktzah on Shabbos. So wait till after Shabbos, and it will become mutter. It's not going to stay muktzah forever. Shabbos is going to end eventually. So the halacha is that davar sheyesh lo matirin. There are two critical dinim about a davar sheyesh lo matirin. Number one, a davar sheyesh lo matirin. We don't say savik d'Rabbanan l'kula on a davar sheyesh lo matirin, because why would you say savik d'Rabbanan l'kula? Just wait, and then you won't have any sveikos, and it's going to be mutter. And the other thing is that we don't say bittul on a davar sheyesh lo matirin. Normally something can become batal barov, batal b'shishim, depending. We're not going to go through all the din of bittul now. We can learn hilchos tarov at a different time. But the din of bittul doesn't apply to davar sheyesh lo matirin. So you have something that's usher right now, and it falls into a lot of heter. We don't say that it's batal if the usher thing will become mutter. Just wait, and it will become mutter. That's the lashon of Rashi in the beginning of Beitza Ad Sheichad Beiser Yochad Beheter. Why would you have it now? Just wait till it becomes mutter. It's going to become mutter. So based on that, let's say you have a trafed up metal spoon. Okay, so you put it aside, right? You trafed it up, you put it aside. We're going to do agal on it one day. In the meantime, it's safely on top of the refrigerator, and no one is going to touch it, except for the housekeeper when she comes, and she's like, why is there a spoon on top of the refrigerator? And she touches it, and she cleans it, and she puts it right back in the drawer with all the other spoons that look exactly like it. Right? So now you have 15 spoons in the drawer, 15 kosher spoons, one non-kosher spoon in your service of 16. Service 16, nice Jewish family. If it were a kli cheres, then it's not a davar sheyesh lo matirin, because there's no way to kasher a kli cheres. But it's metal. There's a way to kasher it. So it's davar sheyesh lo matirin. In Yeridea, Simon Kuf Beis Sif Gimel, Shulchan Aruch brings from a Rashba that a kli that has blios of issa, that gets mixed up with other kelim, is batal barov, and it's not a davar sheyesh lo matirin. We say it does become batal. We don't say that the whole tarov is also, because you could just be matir it. Why? Why don't we say why don't we say it's davar sheyesh lo matirin? Why do we assume that it's batal? So the Rashba explains that, you can kasher it, but it's very expensive to kasher spoons. You gotta buy firewood. You have to buy water that has to be schlepped from wherever, and use the firewood to make a fire to cook the water to do hagala on a kli. It's very expensive. Who has that kind of money to buy firewood and to buy extra water that's 60 times the size of the spoon? So you're going to do it. So it's batal. It's not a davar sheyesh lo matirin, and therefore it's going to be batal. And don't worry about it. The spoon is fine. All the spoons are fine because it's batal. So Rav Soloveitchik thought this man hazeh, that doesn't apply anymore. That halacha doesn't apply anymore. Why? Because the whole halacha is based on the fact that it's not a davar sheyesh lo matirin. It's not easy to be matir it. Who can do that? Who can afford? Rav Soloveitchik, when he said this in Shir, when he said this to his talmidim in Shir, Rav Shachtar told us, he said to the boys in the Shir, how many of you have ever been to Tzfat before, where the Beis Yosef lived? So he said at the time, none of them raised their hand. Can you imagine? Like, if I were to ask talmidim of any age, how many of you have been to Tzfat before? They'll be like, you mean like this year, or you mean like Thanksgiving, or winter vacation? Like which one, which time? We don't yet own an Airbnb there. Like what do you mean? But in that time, who could go to Eretz Yisrael? No, who could afford to go to Eretz Yisrael? In our times also, who could afford to go to Eretz Yisrael? But it was unusual for people to be able to go to Eretz Yisrael. So if Soloveitchik said, I've been to Tzfat, I think in whatever it was, 1940 or something, when they offered him to be the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, and then he was in whatever it was. So he said, I've been to Tzfat. It's on a mountaintop. It's on a hill. So all the water would have to be schlepped all the way up. And how expensive it was to pay people to do that, probably? So it was a hefsim meruba. It was going to be so that's not a davar sheish lematirin, because you can't easily be matir something like that. So that's how Rav Soloveitchik said. Another example is we'll just keep running through examples. Rav Twersky gave a hesped for Rav Soloveitchik, and he tried to explain Rav Soloveitchik's position about women learning Torah Sheba'al Peh. Right, so if you look in the sources based on the Sugya Maseches Sotah, it sounds like women are not really supposed to be learning Torah Sheba'al Peh. Right, Kol Melamed is Bita Torah, Kilu Limda Tiflus, and other such Mamarei Chazal. And if you look in the Rambam, you look in the Shulchan Aruch, it sounds like the women should not be learning Torah Sheba'al Peh. So Rav Soloveitchik was such a modern rabbi that he thought he could change the Gemara, he could change the Rambam, he could change the Shulchan Aruch. He's going to institute a Gemara here in Stern College, and he's going to allow women to learn Torah Sheba'al Peh. How could you do such a thing? So Rav Twersky explained, and I'll read the quote from his hesped for Rav Soloveitchik: the halacha prohibiting Torah study for women is not indiscriminate or all-encompassing. There is complete unanimity that women are obligated to study halachos pertaining to mitzvos which are incumbent upon them. Right? That's in the Ramah and Shulchan Aruch. That if there's a halacha that a woman has to know the halachos of kashrus, halachos of Shabbos, halachos neighbors, halachos of brachos, anything that's nogeya to what a woman does, she's going to have to know. The prohibition of teaching Torah Sheba'al Peh to women relates to optional study. If ever circumstances dictate that study of Torah Sheba'al Peh is necessary to provide a firm foundation for faith, such study becomes obligatory and obviously lies beyond the pale of any prohibition. Undoubtedly, the Rav's prescription was more far-reaching than that of the Chavetz Chaim and others, but the difference in magnitude should not obscure their fundamental agreement. What's he saying? That circumstances used to be that a woman growing up in her mother's home would follow the Masorah from her mother and do exactly as mommy does, and had this tmimustik emuna pshuta, and circumstances have changed. Women started to learn how to read and write, which is a fairly modern phenomenon, and started getting high school degrees and college degrees and PhDs, and being exposed to the sophistication of every other type of intellectual endeavor. And if Torah is going to be something that's unsophisticated, Torah is something that's just a bunch of rules, but there's a lack of sophistication, what's that going to do for a person's emunah? How's a person going to develop a sense of emunah? So that which used to be, and this is, by the way, this is not a manrat, meaning this is across the board, right? Meaning if you they don't like to say it, but the most right-wing Beis Yaakov seminaries, the level of Torah learning is much, much higher than could have ever been imagined a few generations ago. Not even that long ago. My grandmother was a pre-Beis Yaakov woman. She knew how to zag Tehillim. I don't know if she knew what any of the words meant. And she was a tzaddikas, and halavai. I should have the zechus of one chapter of Tehillim that she said. But as far as knowledge, she couldn't follow a class in a Beis Yaakov today. There's no way she'd be able to do that, because the entire world recognized that in order to build that foundation of emunah, and that's not optional. The Isser of women in Talmud Torah is on optional things, but to have emunah, that's absolutely required of every single Jew, and to build a strong foundation of emunah in today's day and age maybe requires a little bit more. So that's another example. Maybe a couple more examples, one or two. Another example that Rav Shachta doesn't talk about, but he kind of does. I asked Rav Shachta about like attending a simcha in a conservative shul or something like that. He says, yeah, Rav Moshe's makel. You open up the Bigris Moshe. Rav Moshe is very much not makel. Rav Moshe says, you're not allowed to go into a conservative shul. So why does Rav Shachta always say, yeah, Rav Moshe's makel? Because Rav Moshe makes it very clear why he's machmir. He says, because conservative Judaism is growing so rapidly, and it's become such a draw, and mechitzos are coming down all across the country, and when you go in, everyone's going to think that it's a marasayin, that you're subscribing to that brand of Judaism. So you can't go. That's a terrible marasayin to go and give such a. He says you're going to go, and harabai shalahem will be Masara Kiddushin. Those are Moshe's practice. Whenever you talk about a conservative reform rabbi, he wouldn't say harav, he would say harabai. So harabai shalahem is going to be the Masara Kiddushin. So an ish kosher shouldn't be there. Rav Moshe writes. So he then says, even if it's not the time of services, it's not Asr Medina, but it shouldn't be done. So Rav Shachta just said, Rav Moshe was matir. Why does he say Rav Moshe was matir? Because obviously the circumstances have changed, right? If you see a guy with tzitzis sticking out and yamkan instead of a black hat walking into a conservative shul, you're like, oh, who's getting married? Who's what simcha is there? Right? So there's no hava mina. That anyone's being nimshach after the conservative movement nowadays. I'll give you another example. There are examples in Hashkafa also. Let me give you showering on Yantif would be a great example, but we don't have time for that. That's happens to be a very good example of where meaning that's clear, right? Meaning that the Mishnah says that the reason you're not allowed to heat up water to bathe your body on Yantif is because it's not shavel kol nefesh. It's not something that people typically universally enjoy on a regular basis, meaning they would shower once every 3 months whether they needed it or not. Nowadays, people shower every day, twice a day sometimes, like after the morning workout and after the whatever, so showering on Yantif, leaving out the dinim d'Rabbanan, which cannot be left out if we're going to have a real discussion about it, but certainly on a d'oraisa level, there's no malacha d'oraisa of heating water to shower on Yantif. What, the Torah changed? No, the Torah didn't change. It just became shavel kol nefesh. The rule is you're allowed to heat water for that which is shavel kol nefesh, like cooking. So showering would be the same thing. Rav Shachta likes to give the example. The Magen Avram writes that when you count Sfiras HaOmer, so how do you say Al Lag BaOmer? Let's say Shloshim v'Shalosh or Shloshav v'Shloshim. How does it go in the Siddur? Right. So I think the Magen Avram says that we say Shloshav v'Shloshim Yom when you count the Omer. So the Magen Avram says why? Because the Gemara says that when the Kohen Gadol would count Achas v'Achas, Achas v'Shtayim, so some reverse the numbers that it was Shtayim v'Achas. And the question is, do you say the larger number before the smaller number before the larger number? And the Gemara says, yeah, Marki Asrei. That some Kohanim Gedolim came from this place, other Kohanim Gedolim came from that place. So each one just did what the normal way to say numbers in their language. So Magen Avram writes, since in Yiddish you always say the smaller number before the larger number, so therefore, and all Jews speak Yiddish, so therefore you should say the smaller number before the larger number. So Shachta pointed out, l'chora, in English, you don't say it's 3 and 30 days. You say it's 33 days. Right? You always say the larger number before the smaller number. So l'chora, we should flip it. Right? That we're going to change what the Magen Avram, we're going to go against what it says in the Magen Avram. No, we're going like what it says in the Magen Avram. You just have to understand if the circumstances changed or not.
Poskim say the opposite in regards to smoking being no longer shovel.
Yes. Yeah, that was another excellent example. Smoking on Yantiv. That smoking used to be shavel kol nefesh. Everyone smoked. Even when I was a child, I remember it was like a very normal thing for people to just be smoking. Now it's not, it's kids that are hiding somewhere, right? Meaning, it's not.
Or Israelis.
Or Israelis, or Yeshiva Bachim, unfortunately. But it's clearly not shavel kol nefesh anymore. Oats are one of the chameshes minei dagan, right? But there are some oats that don't have enough gluten to cause chimutz. So Rav Shachta thought, okay, so the oats aren't one of the chameshes minei dagan means that it causes chimutz. And if it's sirchon and not chimutz, then you can't say hamotziani, you can't say alachilas matzanit. Okay, that's already very controversial, especially for the gluten-free people. We'll leave that one out. By the way, this comes up in Hashkafa also, that circumstances change and people think they're following the Masorah, and it's not so clear you're following the Masorah. Meaning, are we 100% confident that the Chazon Ish would say that no yeshiva bachrim should fight in the army? 100% confident? You know, at the time that decision was made, there were 400 yeshiva bachrim in the whole country, right? So we're 100% confident that that's exactly the same, that it should never ever be revisited, because the Chazon Ish said it. Like maybe circumstances could change over time.
At least you're staying away from controversial issues.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Rav Soloveitchik used to Rav Shachta told us, I think, once that there used to be a fundraiser for the Neturei Karta. So he would come around collecting money, and he would come around with a copy of a check that Rav Soloveitchik wrote for the Neturei Karta, because the Neturei Karta used to support yeshivos, and it was in the Talmud Torah or whatever. They weren't supporting trips to Iran to kiss Ahmadinejad's hand or whatever. Right? That's not what they were. That's not what they were doing. So you can say, I'm going to follow Rav Soloveitchik's minhag. I'll keep writing checks to the Neturei Karta. That is not Rav Soloveitchik's minhag, right? A person has to know when the circumstances have changed. So again, this whole shir this morning was not meant to shatter anybody's emunah or chas v'shalom to even cause any breach whatsoever in emunah, but it's to highlight what emunah means. That part of emunah is that we have a Masorah, and we're supposed to follow that Masorah, but we have to be aware of the nuance of exactly what that Masorah is. We have to have a certain amount of sophistication in order to understand the Masorah, to know that sometimes when you think you're following the Masorah, you're really not. Sometimes you think something is not following the Masorah, and it really is. So I thank you all again for coming to learn together today. I wish you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Rabbi didn't address the idea of